pi, the two most important constants in modern mathematics, are encoded in the Bible. More than a millennium ahead of mathematical discoveries of the world, the true author of the Bible had put these two variables there. We'll see in this video how the number pi is encoded as 3.1415 in Genesis 1:1, the very first verse of the Bible and of the Old Testament, and how the number e is encoded as 2.7183 in John 1:1, the first verse of the Gospel of John in the New Testament. We'll see also how the probability for both events to happen by accident at the same time is less than 1 in billions, and so we'll understand why it cannot be a coincidence. The question will then arise is, if the author of the Bible knew these numbers more than 1,000 years before the world discovered them, and he encoded them in such a way that only in our time we could find these numbers in those verses and see that he knew them from the beginning, who is the true author of the Bible? This series of videos has a total length of 1 hour and is divided in 7 episodes. I recommend you to watch those 7 episodes, but if you prefer to go to a particular them, this is their plan. In the first episode, corresponding to the current video, we'll talk about the importance of the constants e and pi in modern mathematics, where they appear in the Bible, how they are encoded, and what is a biblical explanation for them to be encoded with the intention that only they were found when we were approaching the end of times. In the second episode, we'll talk about the ancient art of gematria that was used to encode e and pi in the Bible. In the third episode, we'll discuss why it is astonishing that e and pi appear in the Bible, why it doesn't fit with everything modern people currently believes about the history of mankind, and so why it implies that they will have to reconsider the way they see the world. In the fourth episode, we'll see how pi is in Genesis 1:1. In the fifth episode, we'll see how e is in John 1:1. In the sixth episode, we'll discuss if this could be a coincidence or if there is another explanation. We'll answer to all the objections that modern people, clinging to their vision of the world, will do to deny that e and pi are in the Bible. In the seventh episode, we'll discuss what the Bible says about the great deception that humanity should be facing in the end of times. Just over 250 years ago, the Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler discovered and published one of the most influential formulas in the history of mathematics. Surprisingly, for his time, the Euler's formula related the exponential function to the trigonometrical function sine, or what is the same, the most important functions from two areas of mathematics considered until then as not so related, on one side arithmetics and infinitesimal calculus, and on the other side trigonometry and geometry. He also made this observation: if in his formula you consider the case when the angle theta has a value of pi, then you obtain a new equation, known until today as Euler's identity, and considered universally among modern mathematicians as one of the most beautiful mathematical formulas because it relates 5 of the most important numbers of mathematics: 0, 1, I, e, and pi. Without going into technical details, let's just observe that the charm of this formula lies in the way that, through the complex number I, are related the two most important irrational constants in mathematics, e and pi. But even more surprising is the fact that 1,500 years before the birth of Euler, these two constants were already encoded in the Bible. These two constants that are the axis of his famous identity and that are the two most important irrational numbers in modern mathematics, present in many fundamental formulas of various sciences, which is present in almost all the mathematical descriptions that modern science does about the universe, were put in the Bible, and they were not put to be seen by people from past centuries. How they could have seen them in times where they had no idea about the existence of number e? They were put there by the true author of the Bible, Yahweh, as a sign for us in the end times of the history of the world. A sign that shows us that the Bible is not the cultural creation of a certain people, but that this people was really elected by God to receive a message that eventually would be transmitted to the rest of mankind. Why to encode them to only be visible in the end of times? It's a recurring topic in biblical prophecy, especially in the book of Daniel and in the New Testament, that the understanding of God's plan and his message would be partially sealed until the end of times. Only when the end of the world should be near, many signals until then hidden should be revealed, and many prophecies and difficult biblical passages of controversial or dubious interpretation should be finally understood. As we approach through the end times, the signs are multiplying, and what before was invisible now can be viewed. And the Bible was written in such a way that once a sign is visible, it is unequivocal that this sign comes from God and is not a coincidence. Where are E and pi in the Bible? As we see, the number pi is encoded in Genesis 1:1, the first verse of the Bible and of the Old Testament. The number E is encoded in John 1:1, the first verse of the Gospel of St. John, and as we'll see, a very special verse in many senses that could be considered as the initial verse of the New Testament. These two numbers are encoded through the ancient art of gematria, by which the letters of ancient alphabets had assigned a numerical value, and so every letter, word, or phrase written in Hebrew or in Greek, the languages used to write, respectively, the Old and the New Testament, have a numerical value associated to them. We'll see later how to compute the gematria values for letters, words, and biblical verses, and how in this way we can find the value of pi in the verse Genesis 1:1 and the value of E in the verse John 1:1. How to know that this is not just a coincidence? To give an answer to this question, let's distinguish between believers and unbelievers. If you believe in God, remember that He is in control of everything. Nothing happens by coincidence in the universe, and in particular, nothing happens by coincidence in the Bible. So you can be sure that it was Yahweh who encoded these two constants in these two verses. If you don't believe in God, then consider the probabilities. As we'll see, the combined event of pi and E appearing by coincidence in these two verses has a probability of less than 1 in 1 billion. It is much easier to win the lottery, but of course, if you choose not to believe, you can always bet for the very remote chance that all this is an accident. When you bet, remember that what is at stake is not a drink, a lottery ticket, or even your current life, but something much more important and irreversible in its consequences: where you will spend eternity. Who has not heard of 666, the number of the beast? It's the best known example of a biblical reference to the art of gematria. The biblical passage invites us to compute the numerical value of the letters of the name of a certain historical person, telling us that the result will be 666. Now, the author of the book of Revelation is John, coincidentally, the same John that has written the verse 1:1 of the Gospel of John. John doesn't even mention the word gematria, because this was a very known art in his time and it was not necessary to explain what everyone knew. To compute the value 666 of the number of the beast, you had to use the ancient art of gematria. But let's see in more detail what this whole thing of gematria is. In ancient times, there was not a special set of different characters to write numbers and letters, as is normal today, but the same letters of the alphabet were used as digits and numbers. This is valid for all ancient languages like Phoenician, Hebrew, and Greek, and their respective alphabets. The procedure is very simple. To the first letter of the alphabet, we assign number 1, to the second, number 2, to the third, number 3, and so on until we reach number 10. Then we jump from 10 to 10, assigning to the following letters the numbers 20, 30, 40, until reaching 100. And then the values 200, 300, 400, until we finish with the alphabet. This procedure is older than the Bible itself, and it was inherited both by the Hebrew and the Greek alphabet from their common ancestor, the Phoenician alphabet, that was the very first one in history from which all others were derived. Let's quickly review the gematria tables for the Hebrew and the Greek alphabets. Let's first consider the Hebrew alphabet. To the first letter, Aleph, we assign number 1. To the second, Beth, we assign number 2. Then, as you can see, follow Gimel with the value 3, Daleth with 4, Hech 5, Vav 6, Zayin 7, Chet 8, Tet 9, and Yud 10. We simply follow the alphabetical order until we reach the number 10. Starting from there, we jump from 10 to 10, so to the letter Kaf, we assign number 20, to the letter Lamed, number 30, to Mem, 40, Nun, 50, Samer, 60, Ayin, 70, Pech, 80, Zadik, 90, and Kuf, 100. From there, we jump from 100 to 100, so the next letter, Reish, will receive number 200, to Shin, 300, and to Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, we assign the number 400. We do exactly the same thing with the Greek alphabet, so to the first letter Alpha, we assign number 1, to the second Beta, we assign number 2, to Gamma, number 3, to Delta, number 4, Epsilon, 5, Zeta, 7, Eta, 8, Theta, 9, and Iota, 10. Starting from there, we jump from 10 to 10, and so we assign to Kappa a 20, to Lambda a 30, to Mu a 40, Nu 50, Xi 60, Omicron 70, Pi 80, and Rho 100. And from there we jump from 100 to 100, always following the alphabetical order, so we assign to Sigma a 200, to Tau a 300, to Epsilon a 400, Phi 500, Chi 600, Psi 700, and Omega, the last letter, and 800. For the Greek alphabet, there's 2 missing letters in the list because they are not in use from some 2,500 years ago. These letters are D Gamma, that was placed in the 6th position of the alphabet and had a value of 6, and Koppa, that was the 18th letter of the alphabet and had a value of 90. This is the reason why these 2 numbers, 6 and 90, are not present in the Gematria table for the Greek alphabet. As you see, the correspondence between letters and numbers has no tricks. It's not that we have assigned to this or to that letter a certain value to obtain a certain result, but the table of values simply follows the procedure mentioned before. Advance following the alphabetical order and assign numbers 1, 2, 3 until 10, then 20, 30, 40 until 100, and finally 200, 300, 400 until the end. Alright, but is it legitimate to study Gematria? This is a question that is more important for the believer than for the secular reader of the Bible. In the end, a good Christian could ask himself, shouldn't we limit ourselves to read the Bible, asking guide to the Holy Spirit to understand it better, instead of making computations and calculations with its letters? We have 2 reasons to consider the study of Gematria as a legitimate one while reading the Bible. In the first place, the very verse Revelation 13:8 not only invites us to compute the Gematria value of the number of the beast, but it literally says, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast." It's telling us that there's wisdom in computing the Gematria value of this or that name, and that has understanding the person who knows how to do it, and even more, as an immediate corollary, that there's no wisdom in him who is not able to compute these numbers, and has not understanding, in the biblical sense, who is not able to do it. So, when we ask guidance and understanding to the Holy Spirit, we have the explicit request from Revelation 13:8 to do it also to understand the Gematria of the text, and not only its literal meaning. The second reason has to do with the findings that the study of Gematria has provided to us during the last years. This video refers simply to a very specific case, the one related to the constant pi and e, but there's hundreds of similar and amazing findings. And what is their function? They act on one side as signals from God, and on the other as an enriching comment to the literal meaning of the text. Okay, but is it dangerous to study Gematria? Yes, it is, because it's easy to be deceived by imitations and deformations based on it. A superficial and irresponsible use of the numbers can lead to all kinds of false coincidences and false clues. It's not the same a coincidence that has a probability of 1 in millions that other that has a probability of 1 in 10. But many times the distinction is not perceived and people think to have found what is not truly in the Bible. This is why the study of the biblical Gematria can be easily used to deceive an inattentive public, and it's common to see it used with unholy intentions. The secret societies and multiple Satanist groups use it frequently in this way, as they do with prophecies and all the other biblical texts, to mislead as many believers as they can and discredit the Bible in the eyes of the unbelievers. They have done it during the last 2,000 years, and they will do it until the last day. To say it clear, Gematria is not Kabbalah or Tarot or any of those symbolical or mathematical games that are of non-biblical origin and where it's easy to perceive the influence of certain secret societies, the Mark of Babylon. All these systems come from the Evil One. They are systems of fake clues, designed to turn us away from the truth, which is very simple, and lead us to convoluted lies. Convoluted lies that are usually believed by the members of these secret societies. Their own pride and desire to feel they are better than others make them fall into the traps of the devil. And it makes sense that they believe their own lies, because if not, how could these secret societies recruit their members? The only way someone could choose to serve the devil instead of serving God is to have been deceived by some of the false stories of the devil. And he has a lot. In conclusion, Gematria is a legitimate but dangerous art. We limit here to use it for this specific case. It's not recommended for lightly use, and the believer who does this exposes himself to serve the devil without intention, or at least without a conscious intention, but God searches our hearts. The Bible is full of teachings and advices in a normal, literal lecture, profitable for doctrine, for proof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. 2 Timothy 3:16. Gematria should be used only as a means to strengthen our wonder at the magnificence of the Word of God, and our faith and confidence in it, and as a way to understand its warnings, as in the case of 666. This is what we'll do here, showing how Pi and E were encoded by Yahweh in two key verses of the Bible. Why is it astounding that Pi appears in the Bible? At first glance, it doesn't seem nothing special. Pi was a very well-known number in the ancient times. However, and as we'll see, Pi appears in Genesis 1:1 as 3.1415, a precision that was unknown in the antiquity. Archimedes was who went further in that time. He gave the approximation pi equals 22/7 equals 3.1428, exact until the 3.14. He obtained it by the method of exhaustion, that is, the better you can do without using mathematics of the infinite. So his achievement was monumental. It confirmed that 3.14, the approximation used in ancient times for pi, was right, but the book of Genesis, by then, had more than 500 years of existence. It's only centuries later, during the Christian era, that the method of Archimedes, developed independently in India and China, allowed to get more precise approximations of the exact value of pi, but we are at more than 1000 years from the moment when the book of Genesis was written. The most ancient document giving such a precise value for pi is from the 2nd century AD. Ptolemy, in his Almagest, gives a value of 3.1416, but he doesn't explain the way he used to reach it. And 4 centuries later, first in China and then in India, more digits were computed through very detailed and complex calculations based in geometrical approximations, a similar method to the one of Archimedes, but taken to the limit. In the Western world, similar methods were used to compute pi with major precision just as late as in the 17th century. But we are at a distance of more than 2500 years from the time when the book of Genesis was written. In this same century, after the coming of the mathematics of the infinite, for the first time we were able to compute, by a simple method, hundreds of digits for the number pi. Today we can compute pi with unlimited precision, and we have computed trillions of digits. But for Yahweh it was enough to put this 15 after the 3.14 to let us see very clearly that the true author of the book of Genesis knew the number pi with more precision than any human of that time and of any of the 10 following centuries. Why is it astounding that the number E appears in the Bible? This is much easier to explain. The number E appears in John 1:1, a book written during the 1st century of the Christian era, but the mere existence of the number E was only proposed by the mathematicians of the world in the first half of the 17th century, more than 1500 years later, and the computation of its numerical value had to wait for other 50 years. So, or it is a coincidence, or Yahweh had everything planned from the beginning. And we can't take for granted that John, who wrote the book, knew nothing about the number E. Why in these two verses? Why not in other two? It happens that these are two very special verses. Genesis 1:1 is the first verse of the Bible and of the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In its original Hebrew version, it has 7 words, 28 letters, and a gematria value of 2701, a number that is full of geometrical and numerical implications, but it's over the reach of this video to go further in this topic. Right now, let's just observe this. Of course, Genesis 1:1 is a very special verse. It is the first verse of the Bible. John 1:1 requires a longer explanation, but it's easy to understand. As we all know, there is an Old Testament and a New Testament. There's 5 books that are the cornerstone of the Old Testament, the Torah, and 5 books that are the cornerstone of the New Testament, the 4 Gospels and the book of the Acts of the Apostles. It's natural that if God placed 2 special numbers, he did it in the initial verse of the Old Testament and in the initial verse of the New Testament. As we have seen, pi is effectively placed in the first verse of the Old Testament. Why then the number E is not placed in Matthew 1:1, the verse that starts the New Testament? Actually, unlike what happens with the Old Testament, where Genesis is in every sense the first book, in the New Testament it is arguable to claim that Matthew comes before John, or that some Gospel comes before another. The ordering of the books comes from human tradition, is not part of the Bible itself, but we have a clear sign and will understand it better if we read the 4 verses 1:1 of the 4 Gospels. Matthew 1:1, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Mark 1:1, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Luke 1:1, for as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. While Matthew talks about the generation of Jesus Christ, and Mark and Luke announce, each one in their own way, that they will tell the gospel of Jesus Christ, John talks about the beginning of all things, the beginning par excellence, not of the beginning of a certain book or gospel, like Mark does. John is writing about the same issue than Genesis 1:1, the beginning of all things. John is taking us to the very moment of creation, and there's no other verse in the Bible, out of Genesis 1:1 and John 1:1, where the central topic is a description of the beginning of all things. In other cases, like in Proverbs 8:22 or Revelation 3:14, the beginning of all things is mentioned, but as part of other question that is the central topic being discussed. The same thing happens in some passages of Ecclesiastes, Isaiah, Micah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John himself, 2 Thessalonians, Titus, Hebrews, 2 Peter, 1 John, and Revelation. Or in other parts of the Bible are mentioned many beginnings, the beginning of this or that month or year, the beginning of this or that kingdom, the beginning of this or that feast, the principle of wisdom, the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, the beginning of the predication of Paul in this or that city, but only in Genesis 1:1 and in John 1:1 is mentioned the beginning of all things, the very moment of creation, as a central and exclusive topic of the verse. So the election of John 1:1 is not arbitrary or capricious. Genesis 1:1 and John 1:1 are the 2 only verses in the Bible that describe to us the beginning of all things, and are 2 initial and founding verses. Genesis 1:1 is the first verse of all the Bible and the first of the Old Testament, and John 1:1 could be properly and perfectly considered as the first of the New Testament. And if there still was any doubt, these are the only 2 verses in the Bible that refer in any way to creation and start with the words "in the beginning." In Genesis 1:1, Bereshit, in the beginning written in Hebrew, the language used to create the Old Testament. And in John 1:1, Enarchi, in the beginning written in Greek, the language used to write the New Testament. Each one of these verses gives us, for each one of these languages and for each of the testaments, a particular version of the story of the beginning. Now let's observe this curious connection between the biblical creation and the universe as we know it. As we advanced in our scientific knowledge of the world, we have discovered that the universe is built of the two constants E and pi. Many of the fundamental laws of physics and other sciences rely over and over again on these two mathematical constants. Is God telling us that in the beginning of all things He put the numbers E and pi as the fundamental building blocks of His creation? What best verses than the verses in the beginning to encode E and pi? Let's start with the computations to see how pi is encoded in Genesis 1:1. Genesis is written in Hebrew, so let's record the Gematria table for the Hebrew alphabet. We already know the method, and it's very simple. To the first letter Aleph, we assign the number 1, to the second Beth, the number 2, and so on until we reach the value 10. From that point, we assign the values 20, 30, 40, and so on until 100, and from there, we assign the values 200, 300, 400. Once we apply this simple rule to assign a numerical value to each letter of the alphabet, we can then compute the value of a word just by adding the values of its letters. For example, the word that in English we usually pronounce Jehovah, which is the name of God, is written with 4 Hebrew letters, Yud, Heh, Vav, Heh. Their respective Gematria values are 10, 5, 6, 5. So the Gematria value of the word Yahweh is 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5 equals 26. It's that simple. This is the Gematria value of the name of God. Let's now consider the 7 words of Genesis 1:1 and compute their Gematria. We see the results in the following table. The first column of the table shows the word written in Hebrew. The second column shows the English pronunciation equivalent to the Hebrew original. The third column shows the words spelled in Hebrew. The fourth one, the respective numerical values of each of these Hebrew letters. And the fifth and sixth columns, the sum and product of these letters. For example, the first word of Genesis 1:1 is Bereshit, that means in the beginning. It's written with 6 letters that are Beth, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, and Tav. The numerical values of these 6 letters are 2 for Beth, because it's the second letter of the alphabet, and as we have seen, we assign number 1 to the first letter, number 2 to the second, and so on. 200 for Resh, 1 for Aleph, 300 for Shin, 10 for Yud, and 400 for Tav. Take a look to the Gematria table of the Hebrew alphabet to verify that these are the right values for each letter. The sum of these 6 values is 913, so this is the Gematria value of the first word of the Bible. And the product of these 6 numbers is 480 million, a value that will be useful to find pi in the future. So, for the first word of Genesis 1:1, we see a 913 under the column sum and a 480 million under the column product. In the same way, we proceed with the other 6 words of Genesis 1:1, and we obtain 7 sums and 7 products, corresponding to the 7 words of Genesis 1:1. These sums and products are the bricks we'll be using later to build our description of the numerical value of the verse. How to compute the Gematria value of a verse? As we have seen, it's very simple to do it for a word. Just add the values of its letters. We could also multiply, for if we want an alternative value, but there's no more simple options. However, for a verse we do have more options. If we consider letters and words, for which, as we have seen, there's a traditional Gematria value defined, these are the values we could obtain counting, adding, and multiplying. With the letters, number of letters, sum of the values of the letters, product of the values of the letters. With the words, number of words, sum of the values of the words, product of the values of the words. Let's observe first that there's no more simple options available. These are the 6 natural ones, the 6 that are not tricky: count, add, and multiply, letters, or words. Let's observe also that the sum of the value of the letters and the sum of the value of the words are in fact the same number, because the value of a word is defined as a sum of the value of its letters. So we just have 5 available values. 1, the sum of the value of the letters or of the value of the words, is the same thing. 2 and 3, the number of letters and the product of the letters. 4 and 5, the number of words and the product of the words. Let's compute now these 5 values for the verse Genesis 1:1. The sum. This is a value that has been considered traditionally as the gematria value of a verse. Simply add the values of all its words. So we have to add the 7 values under the column sum in our table. And we obtain 913 plus 203 plus 86 plus 401 plus 395 plus 407 plus 296 equals 2701. So 2701 is a traditional gematria value of Genesis 1:1. But we still have other 4 variables that we could compute to obtain an alternative encoded value for the verse Genesis 1:1. Let's do it. Number of letters, there are 28. Number of words, there are 7. Product of the letters, we have to multiply all numbers under the column product. The result is 23,887,872 times 10 to the 27. Product of the words, we have to multiply all numbers under the column sum. The result we obtain is 304,153,525,784,175,760. In conclusion, these are the 5 numbers that we found to describe the verse Genesis 1:1. Sum of the words 2701. This is traditional gematria value of the verse. Number of letters 28. Product of the letters 23,887,872 times 10 to the 27. Number of words 7. Product of the words 304,153,525,784,175,760. How we can use these numbers? Few time ago, a very simple and symmetrical formula was found that uses these values and gives an astonishing result. This is a formula. According to this formula, to obtain the encoded value of the verse, encoded by God, we have to do the following division. Multiply on one side the number of letters of the verse by the product of the values of the letters, obtaining in this way a number that we could call the weight of the letters. Multiply on the other side the number of words of the verse by the product of the values of the words, obtaining in this way a number that we could call the weight of the words. And finally, divide the weight of the letters by the weight of the words. This formula by itself would be just a meaningless game if it wasn't because it gives a surprising result that goes beyond any possible coincidence. To see it, let's do the computation for the verse Genesis 1:1. Let's remember our 4 values: number of letters, product of the letters, number of words, and product of the words. Now let's compute the weight of the letters. We have to multiply the number of letters, which is 28, by the product of the letters, which is 23,887,872 times 10 to the 27. The number that we obtain is 668,860,416 times 10 to the 27. This is the value that we have called the weight of the letters. On the other side, let's compute the weight of the words. We have to multiply the number of words, that is 7, by the product of the words, that is 304,153,525,784,175,760. The number that we obtain is 2,129,489,680,489,230,320. Yes, they are very long numbers, and if we changed just one letter in the verse, they would be totally different. And anyway, what happens when we divide the weight of the letters by the weight of the words? We have to divide 668,860,416 times 10 to the 27 by 2 quintillion, 129 quadrillion, 74 trillion, 680 billion, 489 million, 230,000, 320. And we obtain 3.14, 15, 54, 50, 78, etc. times 10 to the 17. Astonishing! So if we compute the weight of the letters of the verse Genesis 1:1, that is simply the number of its letters multiplied by the product of its letters, and we divide it by the weight of the words of Genesis 1:1, that is the number of its words multiplied by the product of its words, what we obtain is a number that equals pi to the fifth significant figure, 3.1415. Let's compare the value obtained for Genesis 1:1 with the true value of pi. Genesis 1:1, 3.14, 15, 54, 50, 78, etc. times 10 to the 17. True value of pi, 3.14, 15, 92, 65, 35, etc. indefinitely. As the value of Genesis 1:1 is obtained as a rational fraction and one of a few natural terms, evidently it can only approximate pi, but it does it to the fifth significant figure, much more than the approximations reached by mankind during the following 1000 years. Is Yahweh telling us in this way that he already knew this number by the time when the Bible was written? Or is this a coincidence? But if it is a coincidence, how is it that with the same formula we find the number E in John 1:1? Let's see it. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, so for Genesis 1:1 we had to use Hebrew gematria. The New Testament was written in Greek, so for John 1:1 we'll use Greek gematria. Let's then remember the gematria table for the Greek alphabet. The method is as we already described for the Hebrew alphabet. To the first letter alpha we assign number 1, to the second beta we assign number 2, to the third gamma number 3, and so on until we reach number 10, and then jumping from 10 to 10 until 100, and then from 100 to 100. In Greek, there's a peculiarity. There's no letters for numbers 6 and 90. This is because these two numbers were assigned to two letters that were no more in use by the time of Jesus. Remember that Greek was already a very old language by the time of Socrates and Plato, who lived about 4 centuries before Christ. As we did for the case of Genesis 1:1, written in Hebrew, let's do now for the first John 1:1 written in Greek. We obtain a similar table, but now is a little bit bigger because the verse John 1:1 has 17 words. The structure of the table is similar to the one we have seen for Genesis 1:1. The first column of the table shows the word written in Greek. The second column shows its transliteration to English. In the third column, we see the words spelled in Greek, and in the fourth column, the respective values of its letters. In the fifth and sixth columns, the sum and the product of these letters. For example, the fifth word of John 1:1 is logos, that usually is translated as word in this verse, and it refers to the Word of God, who is the Son of God and who is Christ. For now, coming back to our gematria computation, the Greek word logos has 5 letters: lambda, omicron, gamma, omicron, and sigma, whose respective values are 30, 70, 3, 70, and 200. So the sum of the letters is 373, and the product is 88,200,000. We proceed in the same way with the 17 words of the verse John 1:1 to complete the previous table, and we obtain 17 sums and 17 products for this verse, exactly as we had obtained 7 sums and 7 products for the 7 words of Genesis 1:1. We just repeated the same procedure. Let's now compute the 5 values that we defined for the case Genesis 1:1. There were sum of the value of all the words or letters. Now it's a bit longer because it's 17 terms. We have to add 55 plus 719 plus 58 plus 70 plus 373 plus 31, etc. And the result is 3627. This result is the traditional gematria value of the verse. The number of words, 17. The number of letters, 52. The product of the words, a very large number, 94 octillion, 930 heptillion, 224 sextillion, 139 quintillion, 983 quadrillion, 918 trillion, 429 billion, 785 million, 786,976 times 10 to the 7. The product of the letters, a number that is even larger, 843 quintillion, 624 quadrillion, 145 trillion, 625 billion, 911 million, 83,000, and 8 times 10 to the 55. And we finished. We have computed the 5 relevant values for the first John 1:1, exactly as we did previously for Genesis 1:1. Now let's go back to our formula. Weight of the letters divided by weight of the words. It is the same formula that we used for Genesis 1:1. You would have every right to think that we were cheating if we used a different formula. Remember that the weight of the letters was the number of the letters multiplied by the product of the letters. As we have 52 letters, and the product of the letters is this large number, we obtain for the weight of the letters the value 52 times this large number equals 43 sextillion, 868 quintillion, 507 quadrillion, 572 trillion, 547 billion, 376 million, 316,416 times 10 to the 55. And for the weight of the words, we have to multiply the number of words, that is 17, by the product of the letters, that is this large number. So the weight of the words is 17 times this large number equals 1 613 octillion, 813 heptillion, 810 sextillion, 379 quintillion, 726 quadrillion, 613 trillion, 306 billion, 358 million, 378,592 times 10 to the 7th. It's a good time to remember that if we modify just one letter in the verse, we would obtain absolutely different numbers. According to our formula, we just have now to divide the weight of letters by the weight of words to obtain the value of the first John 1:1. Let's do it. We have to divide this large number by that large number, and we obtain the result 2.71, 83, 12, 81, 21, etc. times 10 to the 40. This value is very similar to the true value of the number e. Let's compare both. John 1:1, 2.71, 83, 12, 81, 21, etc. times 10 to the 40. True value of e, 2.71, 82, 81, 82, 84, etc. indefinitely. So, as we obtained in Genesis 1:1 a number that was equal to pi to the 5th significant figure, in John 1:1 we just obtained a number that is equal to e to the 5th significant figure. Is this a new coincidence? The same formula in two verses, and we obtained pi for Genesis 1:1 and e for John 1:1 with this level of precision? Once again we ask, did we cheat with the formula? Did we cheat in other way? It's that everything is just a coincidence. Let's discuss these issues in more detail and with more time in the next episode.